who you say you're here for. You don't belong on this floor. People pay good rent for safety, and you are not. Hey!
Ma'am, look, that's my badge. Chief Marcus Allen, Metro Police.
The evening of June 14th began like any other at the Harrington Place Apartments in Philadelphia's University City neighborhood. Residents came home from work carrying grocery bags and laptop cases. The smell of dinner being prepared drifted through aging ventilation systems. Somewhere on the third floor, a television played too loudly. The building settled into its familiar rhythm of creaking floorboards and distant conversations muffled by thin walls. But that Wednesday would end with a viral video, a destroyed career, and a lawsuit that would force an entire city to confront the racism hiding in plain sight within its most ordinary spaces. Denise Crawford had called Unit 516 home for nearly 7 years. She prided herself on knowing everything that happened on the 5th floor of the aging brick building. She knew which neighbors worked late shifts. She knew which apartments had dogs that barked during thunderstorms. She knew when packages arrived and for whom. What she did not know, and what her assumptions would never allow her to consider, was that the black man she watched through her peephole that evening had every legal right to be there. His name was Derek Washington. He was 45 years old. And in 3 weeks, he would officially become the Commissioner of Police for the city of Philadelphia, the first black commissioner in the department's history. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? And if you are new to this channel, take a moment to subscribe. Stories like this one need to be heard. They need to be shared. And when you subscribe, you help make that happen. The Harrington Place sits on the corner of Walnut Street and 42nd, a 7-story red brick building constructed in 1968 during a brief construction boom that promised modern urban living at reasonable prices. The promise aged better than the building itself. The lobby features fake marble flooring that is cracked in several places over the decades. The mailboxes along the east wall have been broken into so many times that management finally installed security cameras 4 years ago after a string of package thefts that resulted in an insurance claim and a strongly worded letter from the building's attorney. The elevator works most of the time. When it doesn't, residents climb the stairs and complain to the superintendent, a heavy-set man named Ronnie, who has been fixing things in the building for 18 years and who keeps a small office in the basement where he monitors the security feeds on a bank of 6 small monitors. The hallways on each floor are narrow, the walls covered in wallpaper that was probably considered fashionable in 1985 but now looks dated and vaguely depressing. The fluorescent lights flicker. They have always flickered. Maintenance has replaced the bulbs countless times, but the flickering continues. Something about the wiring that nobody wants to spend the money to properly fix. 2-bedroom units rent for around $3,200 per month, which is not cheap, but also not unreasonable for this part of Philadelphia. The building attracts the kind of tenants who have stable jobs but not extravagant salaries. Teachers, social workers, city employees, young professionals saving for down payments on houses they will buy in the suburbs once they have children. People who want to live close to downtown without paying downtown prices. People who do not need stainless steel appliances or in-unit laundry to feel comfortable. Derek Washington found the building through a recommendation from his executive assistant who had a cousin living on the 3rd floor. Washington had just accepted the commissioner position after a grueling 6-month national search that had attracted candidates from police departments across the country. He was chosen not because of politics, though politics certainly played a role, but because his record was impossible to ignore. 25 years in law enforcement, a distinguished career that took him from patrol officer to sergeant to lieutenant to captain to deputy commissioner. He had reformed the narcotics unit during his tenure as a captain, implementing community policing strategies that reduced drug-related arrests by 23% while actually improving public safety outcomes. As deputy commissioner, he had overseen a complete restructuring of the use of force reporting system, creating a transparency framework that became a model for other departments nationwide. The mayor had personally recruited him. The city council had voted unanimously to confirm him. Even the police union, historically resistant to reform-minded leadership, had endorsed his appointment after meeting with him and reviewing his plans. He was qualified. He was respected. He had earned every promotion he had ever received through competence and dedication, and an unwavering commitment to the communities he served. But none of that mattered to the woman watching through the peephole of Unit 516. To Denise Crawford, Derek Washington was simply a black man in a hallway where she had decided black men did not belong. Washington had been living in a rented house in King of Prussia for the past 3 years, a comfortable suburban community about 40 minutes west of Center City, Philadelphia. The commute had been manageable when he was deputy commissioner, but the new position demanded a different kind of availability. Emergency calls at 2 in the morning, press conferences that began at dawn, community meetings in neighborhoods scattered across the city, budget negotiations that ran late into the night. He needed to be close to headquarters. He needed to be able to reach any part of the city within 20 minutes. He needed to stop sleeping on the couch in his office 3 nights a week because he was too exhausted to make the drive home. His wife Lorraine had passed away from ovarian cancer almost 3 years ago. The memory still ached in ways he tried not to examine too closely. His son Trevor was a junior at Morehouse College in Atlanta, pursuing a degree in political science and calling home every Sunday evening without fail. The house in King of Prussia felt too large for one person, too full of memories, too far from the job that now consumed most of his waking hours. Unit 518 at the Harrington place had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a galley kitchen with appliances that were older than some of his officers, and hardwood floors that groaned under any weight greater than a house cat. The second bedroom would be Trevor's during holidays and summer breaks. The rent was $3,200 per month, which Washington could comfortably afford. He filled out the application listing his occupation as he always did. The background check came back clean within hours, which made him smile slightly, given that he had spent 25 years conducting background checks on others. He paid first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit totaling $9,600. The lease was in his name. His profession was documented. Everything was legal, official, and thoroughly ordinary. Moving day fell on a Wednesday in the middle of June. Washington had hired professional movers for the furniture, a couch he had bought when he and Lorraine first got married, a bedroom set they had picked out together, the dining table where Trevor had done his homework throughout middle school and high school, but the personal items he wanted to handle himself, boxes of photographs, albums filled with memories he could not bring himself to discard, Trevor's Little League trophies, Lorraine's collection of jazz records that he still could not listen to without crying, important documents, kitchen equipment, the small accumulations of a life that had known both tremendous joy and profound loss. He wore old clothes for the move, faded gray sweatpants, a worn Philadelphia Eagles hoodie from the 2018 Super Bowl season, soft and comfortable and stained with paint from a home improvement project he had never quite finished. His police badge was clipped to his belt, out of habit. Even off-duty, even in civilian clothes, even carrying boxes into an apartment building on a Wednesday evening. He kept it on him. His service weapon was secured in a lockbox in the trunk of his personal vehicle, which was parked in the building's garage. He had been carrying boxes for nearly 2 hours by the time he encountered Denise Crawford. His arms ached. Sweat dampened the back of his hoodie despite the mild evening temperature. He was tired and looking forward to finishing the move and collapsing on the couch that the movers had positioned against the wall of his new living room. He was thinking about the budget meeting scheduled for the next morning, about the crime statistics he needed to review, about the community event he was supposed to attend on Saturday. He was thinking about calling Trevor later that night to tell him about the new apartment, about the room that would be his whenever he wanted to visit. He was not thinking about the fact that someone was watching him through a peephole. He was not thinking about the assumptions being made based on the color of his skin. He was not thinking that in the next hour, his patient explanation and his official badge would mean nothing to a woman who had already decided he was a criminal. Denise Crawford arrived home at 5:30 that Wednesday evening. She parked her leased Nissan Altima in the building garage, took the elevator to the 5th floor, and noticed immediately that something was different. The apartment next door, Unit 518, had been vacant for almost a month. The previous tenant had moved out abruptly following a job transfer, and the unit had sat empty while management conducted repairs and found a new renter. But now, there was activity. The door to 518 stood propped open with a cardboard box. Denise could hear movement inside, the sounds of furniture being arranged, of boxes being set down. She did not introduce herself to her new neighbor. She did not knock on the door to say hello. Instead, she retreated into her own apartment, leaving the door cracked just enough to see the hallway through the narrow gap. She stood there for several minutes before moving to the peephole, pressing her eye against the small lens that offered a distorted but adequate view of the corridor beyond. Denise was 41 years old. She had light brown hair that she colored every 8 weeks at a salon near her office. She worked as an account manager for a regional medical equipment company, a job that paid $84,000 a year and required frequent travel to hospitals and clinics throughout the mid-Atlantic region. She considered herself successful, comfortable, secure in her position in the middle class, though she was constantly aware of how easily that security could slip away if she made a wrong decision or suffered an unexpected setback. She had lived in the Harrington Place longer than most residents on the 5th floor. That longevity had given her a sense of ownership, a belief that she had the right to determine who belonged in the building and who did not. She had reported neighbors before. The young couple in 512 who played music too loudly on weekends. She had called management 6 times until they were finally evicted for lease violations. The Middle Eastern family in 508 whose cooking smells drifted into the hallway. She had complained repeatedly until management told her there was nothing they could do about how people prepared their own meals in their own kitchens. The maintenance worker she had confronted in the stairwell, demanding to know what he was doing in the building, turned out he had worked there for 3 years, and she had simply never bothered to learn his face. The property manager had notes in her file. She had seen them once, accidentally, when a document was left on the manager's desk during a meeting about a noise complaint. The notes described her as excessively vigilant and prone to reporting non-issues. The notes recommended handling her diplomatically to avoid confrontation. She had been offended by the characterization at the time. She considered herself a concerned resident, someone who cared about the building's safety and quality of life. She could not see how others might view her constant complaints as something else entirely. Standing at her peephole that Wednesday evening, Denise watched and waited. At 6:07 p.m., the hallway security camera captured Derek Washington exiting the elevator. The footage is grainy, the resolution limited by the building's budget for security equipment, but it shows enough. A black man in his mid-40s, athletic build beginning to soften slightly with age, wearing a gray hoodie and sweatpants. He carries a medium-sized cardboard box with the word photos written on the side in thick black marker. He walks down the hallway with the steady gait of someone who has made this trip many times already and expects to make it many more times before the evening ends. He stops at Unit 518. He balances the box against the wall, freeing one hand to reach into his pocket. He pulls out a set of keys. He unlocks the door. He pushes it open with his shoulder. He carries the box inside. Do you see anything suspicious in that description? Keys, door, box, entry. The exact sequence of actions that any resident performs when returning home with groceries or packages or belongings. The exact sequence of actions that defines normal, legal behavior in an apartment building. But Denise Crawford, watching through her peephole, saw something different. She saw a black man entering an apartment that had been empty for weeks. She saw someone who, in her estimation, did not look like he belonged. She saw a potential crime in progress because her assumptions about who should and should not be in her building were stronger than her ability to recognize ordinary behavior when it was performed by a black person. She continued watching for the next 30 minutes. The security footage documents Washington making additional trips. At 6:14 p.m., he exits the elevator carrying 2 smaller boxes stacked on top of each other. At 6:21 p.m., he returns with a lamp, the shade slightly crooked, held carefully to avoid damaging it. At 6:29 p.m., he carries a duffel bag that appears heavy, its contents unknown but clearly personal. At 6:34 p.m., he comes back with another box, this one labeled Trevor in the same black marker as the first. Each trip follows the same pattern: elevator, hallway, keys, door, inside. Each trip represents completely normal tenant behavior. Each trip is captured on camera with timestamps that would later become crucial evidence. Denise watched every single one of them through her peephole. Her mind had already constructed a narrative to explain what she was seeing, and that narrative had nothing to do with reality. In her telling, the black man was not a new tenant moving in. He was a criminal of some kind. Perhaps he was stealing from the apartment. Perhaps he was part of a moving crew that had found the unit empty and decided to use it as a staging area for burglary. Perhaps he had somehow obtained keys illegally. Perhaps management had made a mistake. The one possibility her mind refused to entertain was the simplest and most accurate one, that he lived there now, that he had every right to be there, that his presence required no explanation, no justification, and certainly no investigation by a self-appointed guardian of the 5th floor. What makes a person watch a neighbor carry boxes for 30 minutes and conclude that criminal activity must be occurring? What combination of bias and assumption and fear leads someone to see threat in the most mundane of circumstances? These are questions that Denise Crawford would eventually be forced to answer, though her answers would never be satisfying to anyone who asked them. At 6:37 p.m., Denise opened her door and stepped into the hallway. The security camera captured everything that followed. Derek Washington was walking toward the elevator for another trip to his car when Denise intercepted him. He was empty-handed, his keys jingling slightly in his pocket, his badge visible on his belt, though partially obscured by the hem of his hoodie. His expression, visible despite the camera's limited resolution, showed the weariness of physical labor and the anticipation of several more hours of unpacking ahead. Denise positioned herself directly in his path. Her body language was aggressive from the first moment. Shoulders pushed forward, chin raised, phone already in her hand, though she had not yet raised it. Her posture communicated challenge and accusation before she spoke a single word. What happens in the next few minutes would change both of their lives forever. And if you think what comes next is predictable, you might be surprised by just how far Denise Crawford was willing to go, even after learning exactly who she was confronting. The hallway security camera has no audio. The building had opted for video-only surveillance as a cost-saving measure, a decision that the property manager would later describe as the greatest regret of his professional career. But the lack of audio did not prevent the reconstruction of the conversation. Forensic lip readers would later analyze the footage frame by frame. Body language experts would testify about what the physical positioning of both individuals revealed about their emotional states. The story told by the silent footage was complete enough to require no soundtrack. Denise spoke first. Her lips formed the words clearly on the recording. "Excuse me, can I help you?" The phrase sounds polite in isolation. It is the kind of thing a neighbor might say to someone who appears lost, someone who might need directions or assistance. But context transforms meaning. Denise was not offering help. She was demanding justification. She was requiring explanation for presence, for existence, for daring to be in a space she had claimed as her own. Derek Washington stopped walking. His expression shifted in a way that would become painfully familiar to anyone who watched the footage repeatedly. It was not surprise. It was recognition. The recognition of someone who has encountered this situation before. The recognition of someone who understood immediately what was happening and felt the exhaustion of knowing it was happening again. "No, I live here. Just moved in last week." His response was calm, factual. He offered information freely, even though he owed this stranger no explanation. He extended the courtesy of clarity to someone who had offered him nothing but suspicion. Denise's face on the recording shows pure skepticism. Her eyes travel from his face to his clothing, to his hands, and back to his face. The assessment is visible. The judgment is apparent. She is cataloging details and finding them insufficient. "Really? You sure you have the right apartment?" Consider the implications of that question. She had watched him use keys to enter Unit 518 multiple times over the past 30 minutes. She had seen him carry boxes inside. She had observed behavior that could only mean one thing, that he was the legal tenant. And yet she asked if he was sure he had the right apartment. The question was not about uncertainty. It was about disbelief. She could not accept what she had seen because accepting it would require her to adjust her assumptions about who belonged in her building. Derek Washington's shoulders dropped slightly. The camera captures the subtle shift in his posture. Not defeat exactly, but something adjacent to it. The weariness of being questioned in a space where you have every right to exist. The tiredness of proving yourself to people who have already decided you do not belong. "Pretty sure my name is on the lease." A statement of fact. A legal reality. His name was indeed on the lease. He had signed it 3 weeks earlier. He had paid nearly $10,000 for the privilege of living in this building. He was not required to defend that reality to anyone, least of all a neighbor who had decided to interrogate him in a dingy hallway with flickering lights. Denise raised her phone. The camera shows her thumb moving across the screen, navigating to the phone app, pulling up the keypad. The threat was explicit, even without audio. I am calling the police. You look suspicious. Let that sink in for a moment. A man using keys to enter his own apartment looked suspicious to this woman. A man carrying boxes labeled with his son's name looked suspicious. A man engaged in the utterly ordinary act of moving into a new home looked suspicious. What made him suspicious? The answer was visible on the footage. It was visible in the color of his skin. Derek Washington closed his eyes briefly. The camera captures the moment. A man gathering himself before responding to an accusation he should never have had to face. When he opened his eyes, his expression had hardened slightly. His patience, while still present, was being tested. You mean I look black? The question hung in the hallway. It named the truth that Denise would never have spoken aloud. It stripped away the pretense of legitimate concern and exposed the bias beneath. Denise's face showed a flicker of something. Caught, defensive, but not backing down. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Maybe. She admitted it. On camera. With her phone in her hand, preparing to call the police on a black man for the crime of existing in her building, she admitted that his race was the reason she found him suspicious. That single word would eventually cost her everything. Derek Washington unclipped his badge from his belt. The camera angle shows the gold catching the weak fluorescent light. He held it at eye level, giving Denise a clear view of the credentials that identified him as the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the city of Philadelphia. Well, then you have the police commissioner standing right in front of you, and you are in serious trouble. The badge is visible on the footage. The resolution is not perfect, but it is clear enough to see an official police badge being displayed. Clear enough to see Derek Washington holding it steadily for several seconds while Denise examined it. Clear enough to see that he was not bluffing, not pretending, not attempting any kind of deception. He was exactly who he said he was. The police commissioner, the person responsible for the entire Philadelphia Police Department, the official that any 911 call would ultimately be routed through his chain of command. Denise Crawford had just accused him of being a criminal in his own building. This is where the story should have ended. This is where a reasonable person would have apologized, stepped aside, and spent the rest of the evening examining the assumptions that had led her to such a humiliating error. This is where consequences were still avoidable, where the damage could have been contained to an embarrassing anecdote rather than a life-destroying viral video. But Denise Crawford did not stop. The camera captured her reaction to seeing the badge. Her face went pale. Her mouth formed a small circle of surprise. Her phone remained in her hand, finger hovering over the screen. She stood completely still for several seconds, processing the information that had just shattered her narrative. Then she stepped backward. The footage shows her retreating toward her apartment, her free hand rising to touch her face. It shows Derek Washington clipping his badge back to his belt, shaking his head slightly and continuing toward the elevator to retrieve more boxes. It shows Denise standing frozen in the hallway for nearly a minute after Washington entered the elevator, staring at nothing, clearly wrestling with what had just happened. And then, at 6:44 p.m., exactly 7 minutes after learning that the man she had accused was the police commissioner, Denise Crawford went back into her apartment and called 911. Why do you think she made that call? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know what you think was going through her mind in those 7 minutes. The 911 recording was later released under public records laws. It would be played in courtrooms, on news broadcasts, and in countless social media posts as evidence of what racial bias looks like when it is documented in real time. The call began at 6:44 p.m. Hi, I need to report something at the Harrington Place Apartments on Walnut Street. Unit 516 is my apartment, but there is a man next door in 518 who I think might be impersonating a police officer. He showed me a badge, but I do not think it is real. He is black, and he has been going in and out of the apartment with boxes all evening. The dispatcher's response was audible on the recording. Her tone suggested professional patience, strained by skepticism. Ma'am, you are reporting someone for showing you a police badge. He does not look like a police commissioner. He was wearing sweatpants. What does a police commissioner look like? The question was pointed. The dispatcher understood what was happening, even if Denise refused to acknowledge it. Denise's voice became defensive on the recording. Not like that. Not dressed like that. Ma'am, can you describe what specific illegal activity you witnessed? He has been going into the apartment next door using keys. So he has keys to the apartment? Yes. And he has been moving boxes inside? Yes. Ma'am, that sounds like someone who lives there. What specifically makes you believe a crime is being committed? A long pause on the recording. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When Denise spoke again, her voice was quieter. He just does not look like he belongs here. The dispatcher's sigh was audible. I will send a unit to check on the situation. But ma'am, I want you to understand that what you have described sounds like normal tenant behavior. If this turns out to be a false report, there may be consequences. The call ended. The dispatch went out. Welfare check requested at the Harrington Place Apartments, Unit 518. Caller reports concerns about a new tenant. Possible racial profiling situation. Officers should approach with sensitivity. 2 officers were assigned to the call. Through an extraordinary coincidence that would make the situation exponentially more uncomfortable, both officers worked directly under Commissioner Washington's command. Officer Maria Santos was a 7-year veteran who had been personally commended by Washington for her community outreach work. Officer Daniel Reeves was a newer officer who had attended Washington's first departmental address and had been impressed by the commissioner's vision for reform. They arrived at 6:58 p.m. The building superintendent, Ronnie, met them in the lobby. He had been watching the hallway footage on his basement monitors for the past hour. He had seen the entire confrontation. He had seen Denise make the phone call immediately after. That is the new police commissioner in 518. Ronnie's voice on the body cam footage carried the exhaustion of someone who had seen this kind of thing too many times. Blonde lady in 516 harassed him in the hallway. Called you all right after he showed her his badge. Santos and Reeves exchanged looks. The body cam captured their expressions. Disbelief, dismay, the dawning realization that they were about to knock on their boss's door and explain that a neighbor had reported him as a suspicious person. They took the elevator to the 5th floor. The walk down the hallway felt longer than it was. Both officers were aware of the security camera recording their approach. Both were aware that this interaction would be scrutinized regardless of how it played out. Both were desperately hoping for some kind of explanation that would make this situation less awkward than it appeared. There was no such explanation. Officer Santos knocked on the door of Unit 518. Derek Washington answered almost immediately. He was still wearing his hoodie and sweatpants. His badge was still clipped to his belt. Behind him, stacks of unpacked boxes were visible in the living room. Commissioner Washington. Santos's voice was professionally neutral, but her discomfort was evident. I am Officer Santos. This is Officer Reeves. We received a call. Washington leaned against the doorframe. His expression was not angry exactly, but it was tired in a way that transcended physical exhaustion. Let me guess. The woman in 516 called after I showed her my badge and told her I am the police commissioner. Reeves cleared his throat. The call mentioned someone with a possibly fake badge, sir. Washington reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted his official department identification and handed it to Santos. My badge is real. My ID is real. I signed a lease for this apartment 3 weeks ago. I moved in today. My neighbor saw me carrying boxes and decided I must be committing a crime. I showed her my credentials. She called you anyway. Santos examined the ID. She looked at the badge on his belt. She looked at the keys in his hand. The lease agreement he produced from a box labeled documents. The driver's license that showed this address. Commissioner, I do not know what to say. I am sorry this happened. It is not your fault. You responded to a call. That is your job. But I want this incident documented thoroughly. I want the 911 recording preserved. I want the hallway security footage secured as evidence. And I want building management informed that a false report was filed against a legal tenant based on racial profiling. Absolutely, sir. We will handle all of that. Denise Crawford's door cracked open. She had been listening. The body cam footage captured her face appearing in the gap between door and frame. Her expression showed the beginning of genuine fear as she realized that 2 uniformed officers were standing in her hallway, talking to the man she had just reported. Reeves walked toward her door. Ma'am, are you Denise Crawford? Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You called 911 about the resident in Unit 518. I thought I was just trying to... Ma'am, you reported Police Commissioner Washington for moving into his own apartment. You told the dispatcher he did not look like he belonged here. You saw his badge and called anyway. I did not know he was really the commissioner. He showed you his badge. The hallway camera recorded the entire interaction. You can clearly see him displaying official credentials. Denise's face crumpled. The body cam captured tears beginning to form in her eyes. I thought it might be fake. Why would you think it was fake? She did not answer. She could not answer. The only honest response would have been to admit that she assumed the badge was fake because she could not imagine a black man holding such a position. She could not imagine a black man belonging in her building at all. Santos's voice was cold. Ma'am, filing a false police report is a crime. Racial profiling of tenants may violate fair housing laws. Commissioner Washington will decide whether to pursue charges. I strongly recommend you consult with an attorney. Denise's door closed. Through the thin walls of the old building, both officers could hear her crying inside. What happens next, if you have been paying attention to the patterns of these kinds of stories, will not surprise you. But the speed with which Denise Crawford's life fell apart should give everyone pause about the permanent consequences of actions that take only moments to commit. Commissioner Washington returned to his unpacking. The officers completed their documentation and departed. The incident seemed concluded, confined to an uncomfortable evening that would generate paperwork and awkward conversations, but nothing more permanent. That assessment was wrong. By 8:15 p.m., Washington had contacted his department's legal team to request preservation of the hallway security footage. By 9:30 p.m., his personal attorney had received copies of both the footage and the 911 recording. By 11:45 p.m., someone had leaked the footage to social media. The most likely culprit was Ronnie, the building superintendent. He had spent 18 years watching residents come and go. He had heard the complaints Denise filed against neighbors over the years. He had personally witnessed her confrontations with delivery workers and maintenance staff, and anyone else who failed to meet her standards for who belonged in the building. He was, by several accounts, thoroughly fed up with her behavior. The footage appeared first on Twitter, then spread to Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok within hours. By the time the sun rose on Thursday morning, it had been viewed more than 2 million times. The video showed everything. It showed Denise blocking Washington's path to the elevator. It showed her aggressive posture, her phone raised, her obvious hostility. It showed Washington's patient responses, his shoulders dropping with exhaustion, his display of the badge. It showed Denise's shocked reaction and her retreat into her apartment. The timestamp proved that she made the 911 call afterward. The headlines wrote themselves. White woman calls police on black police commissioner moving into his own apartment. Video shows Philadelphia resident reporting commissioner as suspicious after seeing his badge. Neighbor calls 911 on city's first black police commissioner for carrying boxes. CCTV captures racial profiling of law enforcement official in his own building. The outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Civil rights organizations demanded investigation. The mayor issued a statement expressing unequivocal support for Commissioner Washington and condemning racial profiling in all its forms. Housing rights advocates called for Denise's eviction. Legal experts debated whether criminal charges were appropriate. Should apartment buildings share security footage when investigating claims of racial profiling by tenants? I would genuinely like to know what you think about that question. Denise Crawford became the most hated woman in Philadelphia within 48 hours. Her face from the security footage was everywhere. The image quality was poor, but her light brown hair and aggressive posture were recognizable enough. Internet users identified her within hours. They found her LinkedIn profile. They found her employer. They found her social media accounts, which she hurriedly set to private, but not before screenshots were captured and distributed. They found her history of complaints at the Harrington place. Former neighbors who had been evicted after her reports came forward to share their experiences. The couple in 512 described 6 months of harassment before management forced them out. The family in 508 described repeated complaints about cooking smells that they felt were targeted because of their ethnicity. The maintenance worker she had confronted in the stairwell gave an interview describing how she had demanded to know what he was doing in the building, despite the fact that he was wearing a uniform with the building's logo. A pattern emerged. Denise Crawford had been watching, reporting, and confronting people she deemed suspicious for years. She had appointed herself the gatekeeper of who belonged in the Harrington place, and her criteria for belonging had consistently excluded people of color. Her employer placed her on administrative leave within 36 hours of the video going viral. The medical equipment company she worked for issued a brief statement. "We are aware of the video involving one of our employees and are conducting an internal review. We take allegations of discrimination seriously and will respond appropriately once our investigation is complete." The investigation did not take long. By Friday evening, Denise Crawford was terminated. The company's statement was slightly longer this time. "Our organization is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The behavior displayed in the recently circulated video is inconsistent with our values and our expectations for employee conduct. Ms. Crawford's employment has been terminated effective immediately." Denise hired an attorney and issued a public apology over the weekend. The statement read like it had been drafted by a legal team primarily concerned with limiting liability rather than expressing genuine remorse. "I deeply regret my actions on the evening of June 14th. I made assumptions based on unconscious biases that I did not recognize I held. I apologize unreservedly to Commissioner Washington for the harm and humiliation I caused. I am committed to education and self-improvement and hope to become a better person through this experience." The apology satisfied no one. The phrase unconscious bias was particularly criticized, as it suggested that Denise was not fully responsible for her choices, that some hidden part of her brain had acted without her knowledge or consent. Critics pointed out that she had consciously watched Washington for 30 minutes before confronting him. She had consciously blocked his path. She had consciously raised her phone to call the police. She had consciously made the 911 call even after seeing his badge and learning he was the commissioner. There was nothing unconscious about any of it. Commissioner Washington filed a civil lawsuit against Denise Crawford 3 weeks after the incident. The complaint alleged defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of the Fair Housing Act. The lawsuit sought $140,000 in damages. Denise's attorney reviewed the evidence and recommended settlement immediately. The security footage was devastating. The 911 recording was worse. The pattern of previous complaints established a history of discriminatory behavior. There was no viable defense, no plausible argument that could explain away what the camera had captured in that flickering hallway. The settlement was reached within 4 months. Denise Crawford agreed to pay $140,000 to Commissioner Washington. She also agreed to complete 120 hours of racial bias education through an accredited program and to perform community service with organizations serving communities of color in Philadelphia. But the financial penalties and mandatory education were the least of her consequences. Denise lost her job, her $84,000 salary gone permanently. She could not find comparable employment anywhere in the Philadelphia region. Every company that searched her name found the viral video on the first page of results. She was radioactive, unemployable, a liability no employer was willing to accept. She tried to maintain her lease at the Harrington place, but the other residents made clear she was not welcome. The looks in the elevator, the silence when she entered the laundry room, the way conversation stopped when she appeared. Building management did not formally terminate her lease, but the implicit message was unmistakable. She was being pushed out through social pressure rather than legal action. She left Philadelphia entirely. She moved back to her hometown in western Pennsylvania, a small city where she had grown up and where some of her family still lived. She found work as an assistant at a local insurance agency, a position that paid roughly a third of what she had earned before. She rented a small apartment. She kept a low profile. She deleted all her social media accounts and avoided public attention whenever possible. But the internet does not forget. The video of her confronting Commissioner Washington in that shabby hallway remains accessible to anyone who searches her name. It will likely remain accessible forever, a permanent record of the moment her assumptions about who belonged in her building destroyed everything she had built. Commissioner Washington's life, by contrast, continued much as it had before the incident. He unpacked his boxes. He hung pictures on the walls of Unit 518. He arranged his wife's jazz records on a shelf in the living room where he could see them every morning. He set up Trevor's room with the bed they had picked out together and the desk where his son could study during visits home. His neighbors at the Harrington place were welcoming once they learned who he was. Some apologized for Denise's behavior, though they had no responsibility for it. Others brought him small gifts, a coffee mug from the retired teacher in 502, a houseplant from the young couple who had recently moved into 510. Most simply treated him as they would any new neighbor, with ordinary courtesy and casual friendliness. The radiators in the building clanked at night, just as Ronnie had warned him they would. The elevator broke down twice in his first month of residency. The hallway lights continued their eternal flicker. The building remained what it had always been, ordinary and slightly worn and comfortable in its imperfection. Washington walked to police headquarters when the weather permitted, a 25-minute journey through neighborhoods he was responsible for keeping safe. He got to know the bodega owners and the bus drivers and the crossing guards who populated his route. He learned which blocks had problems and which were thriving. He became a familiar presence in the community in a way that no commuter from the suburbs ever could. Trevor came home for Thanksgiving. He loved having his own room in the city, loved being able to visit his father without the hour-long drive from King of Prussia. They watched football together on the aging couch. They ordered too much takeout. They talked about Trevor's classes and his plans for after graduation and the girl he had started dating at Morehouse. Washington did not mention the incident with Denise Crawford. There was nothing to say that had not already been said in interviews and press conferences and legal documents. The matter was closed, the consequences delivered, the footage preserved as evidence of what happened and what it meant. But in quiet moments, Washington thought about what the experience revealed. He thought about the exhaustion he had felt in that hallway, the recognition that had preceded any conscious analysis of the situation. He had known immediately what was happening because it had happened before, in other hallways, in other doorways, and other spaces where his presence was questioned simply because of how he looked. He thought about the people who experienced what he had experienced, but without his credentials, without his authority, without his resources to fight back. He thought about the black men and women who were confronted in their own buildings, their own neighborhoods, their own workplaces by people who could not imagine they belonged. He thought about how many of those confrontations never resulted in viral videos or lawsuits or consequences of any kind. Commissioner Washington gave several interviews about the incident in the months that followed. In one of them, the security footage played on a screen behind him as he spoke. The image showed the shabby hallway, the flickering lights, the moment he displayed his badge to a woman who had already decided he was a criminal. I am 45 years old. I have been in law enforcement for 25 years. I am the police commissioner of a major American city. I signed a lease, passed a background check, paid nearly $10,000 to move into a regular apartment building, and my neighbors saw me unlocking my door with my own keys and called 911. He paused, letting the footage speak for itself. You can see everything on that video. I am carrying boxes with my son's name written on them. I am using keys. I am wearing an old sweatshirt from a football game I attended with my wife before she passed away. My badge is on my belt, and she still thought I was a criminal. She saw a black man and could not imagine any legitimate reason I would be there. Another pause. The footage showed him holding up his badge, the gold catching the fluorescent light. I showed her my credentials, police commissioner, city of Philadelphia, and she called 911 anyway. Not because she could not see the badge. The video shows me holding it right in front of her face. But because she could not believe it was real. She could not accept that I had earned this position. She could not imagine a black man being the commissioner. His voice remained steady, but the weight of what he was describing was evident. That hallway is not special. The building is not special. It is a regular place where regular people live, with flickering lights and outdated wallpaper and an elevator that breaks down too often. And that is exactly why this matters. This is not about luxury buildings or wealthy neighborhoods. This is about everyday racism in everyday places. This is about black people being questioned in spaces where we have every right to be, simply because someone cannot imagine we belong. The interview was watched millions of times. The footage that played behind him, grainy and imperfect, resonated precisely because of its ordinariness. It could have been any hallway in any building in any American city. It could have been any black person carrying boxes into any apartment. The mundane setting made the racism more visceral, more recognizable, more impossible to dismiss as an isolated aberration. Philadelphia held community forums in the weeks after the video went viral. The police department implemented new protocols for responding to calls that appeared to be motivated by racial bias. Apartment buildings throughout the city reviewed their policies for handling tenant complaints. Property management companies discussed how to identify and address residents who used the leasing office or the police as tools of harassment against neighbors they simply did not want in their buildings. But Denise Crawford, as far as anyone knows, never truly grappled with what she had done. Her public apology was carefully worded by lawyers. Her mandatory bias education was a box to check on a settlement agreement. She disappeared from public view, rebuilt her life elsewhere, and gave no indication that she had examined why she saw a black man with keys and a badge and still reached for her phone to call the police. If there is one question this story leaves us with, it is this: what changes? Does awareness of these incidents, does watching video after video of black people being confronted in spaces where they belong, does any of it actually shift the assumptions that people carry with them into hallways and elevators and parking lots? Do people examine their biases before confronting neighbors? Do buildings hold tenants accountable for discriminatory behavior? Do we create consequences meaningful enough to deter the next person from making the next call? Because if we do not address the culture that taught Denise Crawford to see a black man with keys as a threat, then we are simply waiting for the next security camera to capture the next confrontation in the next hallway, waiting for the next black person to be criminalized for the act of existing in a space where someone else has decided they do not belong. Commissioner Washington still lives at the Harrington Place. He still walks to work when he can. His neighbors know him now, greet him by name, ask about his son when they see him in the lobby. He is just the commissioner in 518, the quiet man who keeps to himself and whose son visits during holidays. But he remains aware, always, that some people will look at him and see a threat before they see his badge, his record, his humanity, even in his own hallway, even carrying boxes with his son's name written in marker, even with keys in his hand and every right to be there. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not a mistake. It was a woman seeing a black man succeed and deciding that his success must be fraudulent, that his presence must be criminal, that his existence in her building must be explained, justified, or eliminated. Derek Washington worked 25 years to become police commissioner. He earned it through skill and dedication and an unwavering commitment to the communities he served. He rented an apartment he could afford in a building where he wanted to live. He carried boxes through a hallway like any other resident on any other moving day. And Denise Crawford saw him and called 911. Not because he was breaking in, he had keys. Not because he was stealing, he was carrying his own belongings. Not because he was threatening, he was moving boxes. But because he was black in a space where she could not imagine black people belonged, even after seeing his badge. Even after he identified himself as the police commissioner, even after every possible piece of evidence proved he was the legal tenant. She called 911 anyway, because her bias was stronger than facts, stronger than logic, stronger than a badge held directly in front of her face. The security footage captured everything, every moment of her aggression, every moment of his patience, the badge reveal, the call she made anyway. Undeniable visual evidence of racial profiling in an ordinary hallway with bad lighting and flickering fluorescent bulbs. Proof that racism does not require wealth or privilege to flourish. It happens everywhere, to everyone, even to people with badges and authority and 25-year careers, even to people who have earned their place through merit and sacrifice. Denise Crawford lost her job, lost her home, paid $140. Dessert water $0, became nationally known as a symbol of racism caught on camera. But consequences do not undo harm. They do not change the fact that Commissioner Washington was racially profiled in his own hallway on his moving day. They do not erase the exhaustion of being questioned when you have every right to be somewhere. They do not restore the simple dignity of unlocking your door without being treated as a threat. The question is whether anything changes. Whether people will examine their assumptions before confronting neighbors, whether buildings will hold tenants accountable, whether we will create systems that prevent the next incident rather than merely punishing the ones that happen to be caught on camera. Because if we do not address the culture that produced Denise Crawford, we are simply waiting for the next video, the next hallway, the next black person criminalized for existing. What would you have done if you were in Commissioner Washington's position? And do you think the consequences Denise faced were appropriate, too harsh, or not harsh enough? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe these stories need to be told, if you think it matters to document what happens in ordinary hallways to ordinary people, then subscribe to this channel. We are committed to bringing these stories to light, to demanding accountability, to fighting for a world where Black people can unlock their own doors without being treated as criminals. This is not just about one neighbor or one commissioner. It is about all of us. It is about the assumptions we carry and the choices we make and the world we are willing to accept. The camera is always watching. The question is whether we are willing to see what it shows us.